records a crazy amount of security conferences and puts those out available so you can watch them even if you're not able to travel. So we really do appreciate him coming out here, and he's going to give us a cool talk about lockpicking, some of the games he's made, and things of that nature. So I'll turn it over to Adrian.
Hi, everybody. And wouldn't you figure, okay, everything looks like it's functioning. I have a couple different screens I need to show people, so I have to swap back and forth between. All right. Talking about the C is Lockade, Locksport, electronic games. All right, first of all, I've already been introduced, but to follow up on what Dan said, I'm at IronGeek.com. I have an InfoSec education, an interest in InfoSec education, I should say. I also have an InfoSec education, though, quite frankly, I think higher education is not really the place to learn at InfoSec. But I have an interest in educating people. And I don't know anything, I may get some things wrong. If I say something wrong, like if I talk about the structural strength of lexan versus polycarbonate versus, let's say, acrylic, I might get something wrong, so let me know. Also, I'm a senior information security consultant at TrustedSec. Give Dave a big hug at any conference you see. Give him time off to come to some of these cons and record. And I'm also a co-founder of DerbyCon. And I also click buttons too fast. Okay, very quick intro to lockpicking. This talk is not really about lockpicking. However, I think I should explain some basic concepts before I go too far. And this means I have to run off stage and grab another many bits of kit that I happen to bring with me. Let me see if I can find the proper piece of equipment in here that I wanted to find. Unfortunately, this particular talk is somewhat on the prop-heavy side. Yeah, I believe that's the correct one. Okay, here's the way how lockpicking works. You use imperfections in the lock and your understanding of how a lock works to be able to, well, essentially make it open without having the proper key. As far as criminality of this,
Adrian?
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
How is it an imperfection manipulating some of those?
It's an imperfection because if everything, the pin stack were perfectly aligned, like perfectly drilled, you wouldn't necessarily have one that binds before the other. Without one binding before the other, you'd have to get all of the exact same time by using essentially the key.
Well, isn't it the tensioner's job to bind the pins?
But if they were all perfectly aligned, if every last drilled hole was perfectly aligned, that would be incredibly difficult.
But it would still be difficult.
You need a key.
It's still an imperfection, though.
That's the imperfection.
Well, I'll talk a little bit more about when we show how a lock actually works. Breaking and entering is easier. If someone wants to get into a place, really, as far as criminals are concerned, generally, unless they want to get in surreptitiously, they're going to break a lock. They're going to, let's say they'll break down the door. They're going to bust through a window. But keep in mind that laws vary from state to state as far as lockpicking is concerned and possession of lockpicks. The only one I know that's like outright illegal to have a militia locksmith, I believe, is Tennessee. But it might be a few others. And the other states have like weird laws. Like I was told of Illinois, you can have them, but you can't transfer them. But it is illegal if you have them while you're actually doing something illegal, because it's an extra charge possession of burglary tools. However, they have to show intent. So you just happen to have them, and a good reason to have them, you're probably not going to get in trouble. The Tool, which is an organization for Locksport, has a big article on laws in different states you might want to check out. If you Google for lockpicking laws, it's probably the first thing that's going to come up. But I'm going to talk a little bit about picking a few basic types of locks. We'll talk a little bit about warded locks, pin tumbler locks, and waiver locks. So I'm going to walk over here just to make sure I have what I can demo. I believe, oh yeah, those are some of my warded locks. Yeah, I walk around HackerCons with chains filled with locks so I can demonstrate things. Also, a great self-defense weapon. All right, first thing we're talking about is a warded lock. Now, the way a warded lock works is essentially you have wards in it and keeping from turning just any old key. Now, most of them are not going to look like this. Most warded locks you will see look like this, and the wards are inside like in a, well, I guess in a circular pattern. And if you have the right key, which looks something like this one, you can turn it because it has all the right slots cut into it where none of the wards will block it, and you can just keep turning. That's one type of lock, and you usually pick those with a certain, essentially skeleton keys. The thing about these is those generally have such huge imperfections that There's a set of common warded lock picks that you can use that will pretty much cover all your bases for picking most any warded lock. For example, let me pull this up here in a second. This is why I have the webcam hooked up. Getting to hold still, different issue. That is my set of, or one of my sets of warded lock picks. And essentially, it's as easy as using, well, the key. You've got to find a lock that should work on. Let me see if I have one here. This master lock may or may not be an appropriate one. Put it in, find what's springy, pop the lock like it's a freaking key. There is nothing to it. But that's a sample of a warded lock. And you'll see those are usually the bottom basement ones. And some that are really, really crappy are like the cheapest, I think the cheapest lock you can find at Walmart is like a, what is it, Mountain Fortress or something, or Mountain Security. And you don't even need to buy one of these warded lock sets, but you usually find another key of that same, or another lock of that same brand, take its key, file off everything down its edges except for the very tip. Essentially, at the risk of sounding crude, you're making the key look like a penis. You take down all the sides, and then you just stick it in and turn it. Now, the master lock ones are a little bit more complicated than that, but not by a whole lot. Actually, I'm making sure, I had some camera synchronization problems earlier, so I'm making sure that it's still running. Testing out new rigs for upcoming conferences. I'm going to be recording 6 tracks at B-Sides Las Vegas, and I want to make sure all this stuff works. And then 5 tracks at DerbyCon. Okay, that's basically how a warded lock works. And you can find out more about them on Wikipedia. By the way, a lot of the images you'll see, this one I think I got from Wikipedia, but some of the ones you'll see I got from Debbie and Olam, who spoke here last year. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about wafer locks. Wafer locks are generally considered to be crap, but they don't have to be. Like your car probably has a wafer lock, and it's going to be a lot tougher than the average lock you see on a desk. But the way a wafer lock works is, since you have these wafers that you see in here, and when a proper key is inserted, it lifts each one of the wafers out with this groove down the bottom, so you can actually turn the key. And I have a little example of a wafer lock here that I essentially took apart just for these kind of events. And let me switch back over to this camera. All right, this is my wafer lock. You may have seen these in all sorts of desks. The way you can tell it's a wafer lock, actually let me go step back a second. The way you can tell a warded lock usually, if you look down the keyway and it looks like that, you don't see any pins or wafers coming down, that's generally going to be a warded lock. In the case of a wafer lock, you go look down it and you'll probably see it, and it might be too dark, flat pieces, not like rounded pins, but little flat pieces. You see how I do the lighting different. You know what? This is really hard to hold it and move when you're used to doing like a mirror. Yeah, you'll see little flat pieces in there. There you go. That's a good shot. And the way I was saying it works is there's these grooves in it. So if I take this out of there, you'll notice these little grooves. What happens is those little wafers come down far enough to where they lock in the grooves. However, when the proper key is inserted into one, and I'm not even sure I have the proper key, you'll notice that proper key inserted should push those out of the way, and then it becomes a smooth surface and you can turn it. And then pop back down. So that's basically how a wafer lock works. And you pick that pretty much the same way. Well, I guess you sort of pick it the same way as you can a pin tumbler lock, which I'll talk about next. However, generally you just sit there and rake it. You essentially put a little bit of tension and just start raking back and forth with whatever pick you choose to use that you think works the best for you. Personally, I'm a big fan of something called a divorce offset diamond. And let me bring this up. You know, showing off lock picking stuff, it's good to have everything zoomed up on the screen because some of these things are a little tiny. Like that's a DeForest offset diamond. And I usually have really good luck with these. They're very small and easy to use on locks with small keyways. Like, you may be familiar with the TSA locks. These are special locks that the TSA agents can open up with a special key that they have so that they don't have to cut your locks off if they want to inspect your luggage that's going through an airport. Every TSA lock I've ever encountered is crap. Well, the whole idea of a lock that a single key or a single set of keys can open is pretty much doomed to failure at the beginning. But they have small keyways sometimes, and this is really great for opening up those. And let me see, move back here. But that's how one of those works. Then there's a pin tumbler. Now, this is the artwork that Deviant came up with, or something that he did, or someone at Tool did. And this is going to illustrate how an actual pin tumbler lock works. Your door lock is most likely a pin tumbler lock with 5 pins. Most master locks that you're going to have, like padlocks, they're going to be like 4. But the way one works, and you can see in the illustration, let me see if I can move my mouse pointer. Right here, once everything is lifted above the shear line by the proper key, all these pins have certain cut depths in them. This is called a driver pin, because it's the one pressing down, or up. We usually think of, some people call it the top pin. If you go to some other country, it's not going to be the top pin necessarily. Other countries sometimes hang the lock the opposite way. So a better term is the driver pin, these blue pins that touch the spring. The key pin, of course, touches the key. And what you do is you have different key pins of different depths, and if you have the proper key in it, it lines them all up, the shear line here, and you can then turn it like you see right here. You see misaligned one with the wrong key, properly aligned one with the correct key. Well, the idea behind lockpicking is use imperfections in how holes are drilled and maybe not perfect pins and the various other little problems to be able to get things to lock up above the shear line. So what you do is you apply a very little bit of tension, and those, I don't know if I have a good illustration of this. Let me check the next one. No, I don't have a top-down view. Let me switch over to the webcam to give you a better idea then. And I'm not going to actually sit here and pick this one, because this one, while you can actually see the pins, it's sort of a pain to pick. This here is a transparent lock for demoing how to pick locks. And right now, all you see probably is the driver pins. So if I can get this thing aligned, this would be a lot better. So all you do see right now is, yeah, that's not going to be high enough. They actually make things that are just for this kind of demos. Oh yeah, that lighting is beautiful. Okay, you can see the pins in it, and if the proper key is put in, they're all going to line up, and you'll be able to turn the lock. So let me actually grab the right key. That's the wrong key, so I'm going to use the wrong key first. Insert that, and you'll see that they're misaligned, and you can see how I've actually driven some of the key pins up into and past the shear line. If you put in just the right key, well, they all line up. Let me see if we can do it as I insert it. It's hard not to get glare on here. They line up, and you can turn the cylinder. The way lock picking works, well, at least with pin tumbler locks, is what you do is you try to apply the slightest bit of tension. That's the number one thing people screw up, is they apply too much tension, and you try to get each pin, you try to feel for the one that's binding, the one that has a little pressure on it. Then you press it up and you try to, and I can't do it while holding like that, but see if I can get one of them up. Yeah, I may not quite have it there, but let's say that second pin in, I might have it bound right above the shear line. Actually, looks like maybe the one farthest, second from farthest in, I have right above the shear line. Now, when I was talking about imperfections and how they drill it, if they drilled all those holes into it almost perfect, that would make the lock a lot harder to pick. But I mean, there's certain tolerances. The higher tolerances you get, the harder and more expensive it is to make. And generally, when it comes to locks, if you make something too expensive, people aren't going to buy it. And to tell you the truth, my front door lock isn't nothing really great. It's it should be pretty easily pickable. I bumped it before too. I'll talk about bumping in a second. But basically, how you pick lockers, you just use those imperfections. You put a little bit of pressure, and you feel when it binds. Now, I personally actually am stuck at lock picking. I can't really feel where a pin binds. I'm not good at single pin picking. But what I've gotten pretty good at is raking. And raking is essentially, well, fuzzing the lock. If you're familiar with fuzzing and exploit development, you basically throw shit at it until it opens. So you seriously, let me go grab one that should not be too difficult to, actually I think I got one here. Now I got that one. I'm trying to find one of my nice easy ones because it's really embarrassing when you're on stage and you're trying to pick a lock and you totally fail at it. So obviously, I would be lame and choose something simple. And I know someplace in here I should have a rather small master lock that will open. Well, you know what? I think I'm going to use this one. Hopefully this one will work okay. If not, grab a couple of these. These are like master lock number 3s. A lot of people like to start off practicing on these because they're so easy, generally speaking. You can tell it's a master lock number 3 because it says number 3 at the bottom. And basically you just apply a little bit of tension. And the nice thing about master lock also for teaching yourself is it doesn't matter which way you turn the lock. Either way, you can make it turn. And you basically, let's see if I can do this while on stage. Now you didn't see me hold it down there, but pop the lock by basically raking across it. And essentially it just bound the pins up and sort of like fuzzing it. Now, like I said before, I like the force offset for almost everything. I mean, it's my go-to pick. But there's tons of different rakes that have different shapes to them that are good for raking inside the lock. Like this one is based on a bow guitar. It's sometimes called a rave rake. But that's a common one you see people use. That's one of my other favorites to carry with me. There's also something some people refer to as an L rake, which generally looks like this. But different locks, you know, respond to different picks. You just gotta try different raking techniques. I mentioned the bow guitar earlier. Bow guitars are kind of neat. I think they originally were made by Raimondo, I think is the guy who originally made them, out of street sweeper bristles. But I've made some improvised ones out of windshield wiper blades. By the way, keep your windshield wiper blades or bring them to me. They make great tension wrenches, or tension tools as David likes to call them. And what you do is you can put a rake pattern in the other end, so when you use them, you use one in the lock to apply tension while you're raking with the other. Here are some that are actually professionally made. They're made out of some kind of titanium alloy. They're nice if you have nothing else to carry with you. I'd rather have a full pick set still. And also, I think the titanium alloy is largely a gimmick. They talk about low magnetic profile. Okay, it's still going to get detected by a metal detector if it's sensitive enough, because magnetic doesn't matter. It's conductive that matters to a metal detector. Not that I spend a lot of time trying to get past metal detectors or anything. Okay, let me put that away just after I explain that. Okay, so there's ways they can make a lock more difficult to pick. Like here's a few different types of safety pins, or sorry, security pins. So here's your normal, well, a normal pin doesn't have any kind of serrations in it. This one is a spool pin. And you see how when it's pushed up, there's a spot where it can bind an extra spot and makes it harder to be able to get it past that shear line. There's also ones that are mushroom, serrated, and I think this one might be considered serrated. And there's another mushroom one, and that's a picture that Debbie put together to illustrate how you can kind of pick them still by feeling where it sets one time, seeing it turn back, and then turn it again. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with these kinds of locks, so I can't tell you a whole lot of much about ones with security pins, other than they'll be a pain in the butt to pick. There's also something called lock bumping. Lock bumping is kind of cool. Essentially, instead of picking it, and the security pins don't matter on this one, unless it's a pin that there's ways around to stop lock bumping also. That involves like different weight pins, different strings of springs, and a few other items. With lock bumping though, you ever see those Newton cradles where you pull back a ball and it goes bounce, 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 bounce? You're doing the same thing with the pins in the lock. You smack something in, you smack the key in, and then you turn at the same time with a light bit of pressure, and hopefully you get all of the driver pins up into the cylinder, the key pins fall down first, and during that brief bit of time, you can turn the lock. Now, you can do that using, I think it's sometimes referred as a 999 key, depending on the key type, but generally it's a key that has all of its depths taken down to the lowest level. And I didn't explain that before, but keys also have depth levels. For instance, you can read that with an interpreter and know a number for that particular depth, and if you have the number for your key, you can go and get a new key made for that lock, even if you don't have any of the keys for it. For instance, when I got various master locks at a hardware store, if you look on the back of them, you'll see the key code. And sometimes you'll notice a whole, like 5 of them in a row that all have the exact same key code. And which kind of is cool if you're trying to buy one with the same lock for everything. But it also means if you see somebody leaving that bought that particular lock, you might want to visit our house later after you buy one yourself so you can break into the shit. I don't know, it's not maybe the most secure practice in the world. But you can actually read those depths and get the key reproduced by number. Now, my electronic games, when I'm taking out the various conferences, please don't bump them because they're a little bit more sensitive. And bumping is semi-destructive, and it's not good for the lock to have someone hammering on it with a key. Now, that brings me, after I basically explained how lockpicking works, is there any question about how lockpicking works in general? That was a super quick overview, and you're much better off watching Devian's talk later on. Any questions about how locks work right now? Okay, I'm going to go on to talk about practice aids then. Now, generally, when you go to most lockpick villages, or lockpick pavilions, whatever they want to call themselves, you're going to see people with these, like lock towers that they'll have up there that you can try to pick. Also see things like these progressive locks, which essentially are pinned to have 1 pin, 2 pin, 3 pin, 4 pin, so that you can practice on one that's an easier lock. Because the less pins you have, generally speaking, the easier the lock's going to be. So those progressives are nice. I think actually most sets start out with 2 and go up to 6 pins. Some of your more high security, well, semi-high security door locks have 6 pins instead of normal 5. And this is an example of a tower Dogsman essentially helped me put the gear together. I like it because we got a Derby Con logo etched into it. But this is how a lot of people practice lockpicking. Essentially, just drill a bunch of holes in a board. I think this is a 2x8, 2x6, and mount locks in it and go to town. And that's not a bad way to practice, but I started thinking maybe there's something cooler we can do. And Dogsman had always done some pretty cool things. Oh, also there's these transparent locks that you can use for practice. But really, this one's hard to get ones to bind up. It's good for illustrating how a lock works. It's not so great for practice, because also in reality, you're not going to be able to see into the lock. Well, at least not from the side. Oh, that brings me to Dogsman. And now my romance with Dogsman, I think, started in like 2004 or so. I was looking around for other hacker video podcasts, and I found him. And I found out, oh, he only lives 2 hours away from me. We met up at Freaknik 2005, and he had some lock stuff there, I believe, and he was really big in the Locksport. I didn't really get into it until like about a year ago, but he made all these games that I thought were pretty awesome. And his local hackerspace is Bloomingdale's in Bloomington, Indiana, and he even has a little webpage out there on some of the lockpicking games they made. What you see here in the background is the Rumble Challenge, which I'll get to in a bit. It involves drinking and lockpicking. Nothing can go wrong with that. All right. One of the first games that inspired me was Dogsman's ammo can bomb. And this is a contest that he had, I think it was at DerbyCon 2, where, I think it's brought the other ones, where the idea is you try to pick the lock as fast as you can before the timer runs out. Whoever's the most time left wins the game. If you don't do it within a certain amount of time, it simulates it blowing up. It also, he's done some more neat things in it, like I think he has a tilt switch in it, so there's some tamper stuff to keep you from, trying to bypass the locks in other ways. But that kind of inspired me. It's like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. He actually refused to send me the pictures of this without using a PGP because he didn't want, well, essentially, this is kind of the same as a bomb of it, and you're hooking it to a buzzer instead of a detonator. So, but it's pretty cool, and it inspired me to start doing some of my own. But a thing that he put together that was really fascinating is the Rumble Challenge. And usually we just use it for playing for time and see who can pick the fastest. I won the game at Circle City Con, so I got like a $100 gift certificate to Hacker Stickers and bought a bunch of loaner picks so I could put them in my games. But the way this thing works is when you pick a lock, it pours you a shot and everybody else a shot. You get points for each shot you drink, but you also get points depending on how fast you pick the lock. However, once you've picked your lock, you sit out after drinking your drink, and other people keep drinking. So it's possible to be the worst lock picker, but the drunkest person there, and still win the game. To tell you the honest truth, the rules are a little bit baffling to me. I'm not always, I don't always follow them. Maybe because I've been playing the game while I was trying to understand them. But there's also a scoreboard in the background, which I think one of Dogsman's friends put together. The guy you see there is Zach. Yeah, Zach's interesting. That's all I'm going to say about Zach. Zach's a great guy. But you see them having the Rumble Challenge set up. I think that was at DerbyCon. Unfortunately, the hotel usually has rules about alcohol, so we have to play for time in the hotel. But occasionally you'll find someone may have dragged one up to the room party or has brought it to a local hackerspace to play with. But it pours you shots as you pick. I mean, who wouldn't like that? He's got like an improvised vibration motor in it to throw you off. He's got like an overvolted aquarium pump to pump the booze. and a bunch of tubing, and that display board I mentioned before, which I think a friend of his came up with to show who's picked so far, who's finished, what the time was. So that's a couple games that he's made, and that's kind of inspired me. Talk a little bit about gamification. I'm going to go ahead and just read the definition from Wikipedia. Gamification is the use of game thinking and game mechanics in non-game context to engage users in solving problems. Now, in my case, I'm thinking of using this for lock picking, and the way DOSman did. It's a great way to teach people how to pick locks, because it's kind of more interesting just picking a lock by itself. People sometimes like scoring systems. They like a sense of competition. Also, it's kind of like going to the gym and not keeping track of how much you benched this one time or how many reps you did. You don't know if you're making progress or not if you don't have some kind of metrics. With these games, you have metrics. You know how long it took you to pick a lock. And it's good to see, you're building up and seeing your progress. And some people are really competitive, so if you have a game, it's kind of fun to sit there, have a few drinks at a time, play a lock picking game, and see who can beat the other people. And games make things that are kind of mundane a lot more interesting. So my idea was, can I make one? I had a few limitations. I didn't have a whole lot of tools. I wanted to do everything on the cheap. That ended pretty quickly. I've now bought a bunch of tools, mostly just for doing these games. I wanted to also make mine a little bit more flashy than DOSman's, though not necessarily more flashy. Well, my ammo can more flashy, not necessarily the Rumble Challenge. I have my own version of that in the works, hopefully. I wanted to be simple to code, and I wanted to use crap I had laying around. So my idea was, I took an ammo can, and this is what I came up with. I got a Harbor Freight ammo can, and essentially did some modification to it to put in some plexiglass that I had. And, oh, by the way, that is because it ran out of time and blew up. It's resetting itself. So I basically made my own version of it, which I'll show in more depth here in a bit. But here's the parts to it. I took a bunch of cam locks. Essentially, a cam lock is a lock that you normally going to see in desks and so forth. Like, here's some cam locks. I got them all mounted on a little board. Let me move this back up. Yeah, these are a bunch of cam locks. Essentially, you'll see these in desk drawers and so forth. A lot of times, those crappy wafer locks, you can look around, though, for some that are other types. Like, this is I'm pushing the wrong one. Tubular lock, a cross lock. That's really hard when it's not a mirror. That's a cross lock. More tubular locks. And at one time, I had what's called a disc detainer lock in there, but I don't have it right now. And the idea is when you turn the lock, it's actually turning this cam out of the way. Turning the cam out of the way, so it gets out of the way of the desk drawer or whatever you have the cam lock in, and you can pull out the desk drawer. But the nice thing with these is they're easy to mount because you only have like a 3/4 inch hole or a special double D hole, which forgot where I had it. A special double D hole, which makes them a lot easier to mount than like door locks, and they're smaller, so you can do little electronic games with them. A plastic ammo can from Harbor Freight, that's fairly inexpensive. I had a bunch of plexiglass laying around because I used to work for the New Albany Paper Mills Library, and they happened to move to a new library building, and they had all these little plexiglass sheets covering up like the call numbers, and they were leaving the building, and they were just going to get scrapped. I was like, I'll use these later. And then about 10 years later, I used them. I still have a few left. I'm a bit of a pack rat, in case you can't tell. Okay, so the plexiglass in there, I also used something called a Tinsy 2.0 because I had them laying around. A Tinsy is a little microcontroller Dave was talking about earlier for using security. My original interest in Tinsy was you can make it act as a keyboard, but you can also make it act as a very nice little microcontroller for hooking things to. If you want to do like sensors or switches and have it do different things. I also have what's called an I2C serial LCD. This is a little LCD display that takes 4 lines, 2 for power, 2 for data, and you can throw up text on it. And there's a bunch of jumpers, and also use something called beading wire. You ever go to like the craft section? There's these little crafts for little girls where they can put beads on these wires. Well, that stuff is really useful for some electronic projects. You just need to have a conductor that's open to the air and wrap it around things to make sure everything's grounded. So I use that for a lot of my stuff. And here's essentially how it worked. And I think this graphic got screwed up at one point. Well, I guess it's still okay. Somehow, when you're moving between different versions of Office, OS 10 and to Windows, things get screwy. But essentially, I have an input on the Tinsy, and I have a bunch of little posts that are grounded. I have a neodymium magnet on each one of these, really powerful magnet, so when that cam comes over and touches the metal post, it sticks. so it doesn't bounce up and down. I also have code in there. A bounce, by the way, when you actually touch a switch, you get it touching, untouching in the sense in like microseconds. So that would read as different, ons and offs. You don't want that to happen. So you put stuff in the code to say, oh, is it closed now? Oh, it's switched on? Okay. Let me check again. Is it really switched on? So you check over multiple times. But the magnets help with that. And basically, I'm just reading whether or not the lock is now grounded. And based on that, I say whether or not the lock is locked. Huge flaw of this original design. You might be able to see it in a bit. Actually, I'll probably demonstrate it. All this is hooked up also to the screen. And I also have this little RGB LED just for the hell of it, just because I think it's pretty. So, let me actually show what came out of all this. Now, hopefully I can unplug this and keep it going. Well, that was ever so slightly unexpected. Alright, let me put this crap back together. Yeah, I'm going to make something that's a little bit more, well, does it live? Not quite yet. Hold on, let me power cycle this thing one more time. Yeah, I didn't quite expect the lid to come off. Okay, here we go. Now it's going again. Essentially, let me get my keys out of the way. You just have a countdown, and you have these little icons that say whether or not a lock is locked or not. And the idea is to get as much time as you can. By the way, you might notice that is so. You know what? I think I know what was happening. I think that the battery that I put in there, the improvised battery, well, it kind of sucks. We'll get to you in a second. Shut up. Damn, that voice is annoying. Okay, let me see if this thing will power back on now. Well, don't you just love it when you're trying to demo something and you destroy your project as you're about to demo it? Let me see. This is one of the downsides to me using jumpers for almost everything, is it's not necessarily the most rugged affair. Cool. That's going again. I'm going to leave you plugged in, and I'm going to gently move you. Yeah, I got new games that are going to be more ruggedly built than this. Actually, Dave wanted me to build a bunch of these ammo cans for taking whenever a Trusted Tech sponsors someplace and has a table, because it gives salespeople a chance to play at the game. Well, it gives people a chance to play at the game while the salesperson can talk to them. But essentially, we just have a countdown, and we have this little lock icon to show whether or not a lock is locked. And since I'm going to have a really hard time picking that while I'm standing up here and holding it, I'm going to have to put it back down for a second. And so once you pick one, hopefully you'll see a flashing. Once one's picked, man, I think I broke something as I was doing that. Okay, when it actually comes up, we should see that one of the blocks says it's now picked. And you see what I did was I basically turned that cam and made it touch the post. It says pick 0, and you see it says like more than one is picked now. Because somehow or another, the electronics in this accidentally broke when I dropped it, and it says it's now picked. We'll talk about building ruggedness into your games later on. But that is essentially to pick it as fast as you can and have as much time on the clock as you can. It also keeps changing colors as it gets closer and closer to time, so it's like, trying to rush you on. So let me set this aside and try not to break it again. But that came out pretty good. Really, I probably should have demonstrated on this thing instead. This is a much more refined version, which were, oh man, what the hell am I hooked onto? How did I do that? Okay, yeah, you're coming undone. Believe it or not, I've actually kind of practiced this speech once. Okay. Organized chaos. Yeah, this is the pick boy. And essentially, same kind of thing, but I have 6 locks in it. And I think I have like I put a 2-pinner, 3-pinner, 4-pinner, no, 1-pinner, 2-pinner, 3-pinner, 4-pinner. I think 2 5-pinners in the middle. And it's really much the same kind of thing. It's got the same kind of lock icons. And that is just to pick it as fast as you can. This one, though, has a color changing screen. You can play that during lunch if you want. I have that on some table someplace. That one's much more readily built. Now, that brings me to switching mechanisms. The way I've been doing it, well, there are actually keyed switches you can go buy. Unfortunately, most of them are pretty cheap. A lot of them are really small. A lot of them are way too simple to really teach you how to lockpick. So I wanted to use something that was actually used to really secure something. I mean, most switches are just to make sure you don't accidentally trip. Most switched keys are just there to make sure you don't accidentally trip some electronics. There is the medical free-pan electric switch key, but that's kind of expensive, what I found. Dawson used one, though, in one of his games. So what I came up with was essentially just a cam and a metal post. And what you do is when that cam touches the metal post and becomes grounded, you have another line leading off from it to the tensy, and you can read it and say, oh, you're now locked. However, there is indeed a huge flaw with that particular plan. And I'm going to try to illustrate that here in a second. And that is, let's say you have one locked. Actually, let's say you have one locked already. Well, since the other one's already grounded, you can touch it to another lock, and that other lock becomes grounded without ever picking it. I've changed that pattern in the newer one, where essentially I'm reading off of the touch post instead of reading from the lock, because you can't directly touch the touch post from outside the enclosure. But that was a flaw in my original game. But that's how I did my switching mechanisms for the cam locks. And I will explain basically what a cam lock is. One thing you want to be aware of when you're going out to switch cam locks, you want to make games, is those ones that have nuts and those ones that have bolts. For instance, ones that have clips. This has clips, this one has nut. So you want to make sure that your cam locks have nuts. You don't want nutless cam locks. Because those ones that are nutless are awfully hard to actually install, because you have to have a very thin piece of sheet metal, a very thin piece of plastic that you can fit that clip against. There's actually a model I bought from HL Flake, which is an online company that sells a bunch of lock products, that has both a cam and a clip, so it's like the best of both worlds. But when I can, I try to find one that has a nut that you screw on. That's this one outside here. All right. Most of these cam locks you're going to find in America use either a 3/4 inch hole or a special double D hole. If you actually looked at the cam lock straight on, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it from what I have mounted here, but like this is a certain type of cam lock that's a padlock cast. But you notice it has a flat side, because if you look out straight, if you could look out straight on, I didn't have that cam on it, you would be able to notice that it's got that flat side. So it's not like a perfect 3/4 inch hole. And that flat side's there to keep people from spinning the lock, because you can put it into that double D hole and it's not going to move. And that's been pretty important. I wish I made 3/4 inch holes in this lockpick game. The problem is novice pickers, one of the bad things they do is they apply way too much pressure on the game or on the lock. And so they'll end up moving it inside the hole and moving the entire lock instead of actually picking the lock. So I'm now trying to make double D holes, which are essentially like 5/8 inches across and 3/4 this way, an outer circle that now has flat sides on the, right and left or whatever. It's 3/4 inch. So it basically looks like this. I found a couple ways of doing this. You can try to drill a 3/4 inch hole and then tighten everything down so tight that they can't turn it. That's kind of hard to do in plexiglass. You use a 5/8 inch drill and try to dremel out everything else. I found I can use a 5/8 inch hole saw and drill 2 holes, top and bottom, and then do a little bit of filing or dremeling out. And you can make something approximating this double D hole. You can also use something called stabilizing plates, which are basically pieces of metal that, like this one, that are already shaped that way, and you can try to glue those into the game. And there's a bunch of different models of stabilizing plate. By the way, this is all going to be up online, hopefully here shortly. When I post the videos, I'll make sure I link to this PowerPoint slide presentation as well, so you can find these problems if anybody wants to create these games. Another thing I found you can do is, if you're just doing it to plastic, you can make your own hot punch, essentially. What I do is I find a stabilizing plate, put a piece of copper in it, I think it was a 1/2 inch tube of copper, and then heat it up, put it in that stabilizing plate, and stretch it out to fit the outer edge. Then, whenever I actually want to punch a hole, I heat that up with a torch, plunge it right through the plastic. Yeah, noxious fumes, brain cells dead, not how I need them anyway. But that, works pretty freaking well, and it makes a very good double D hole so that, pickers aren't spinning the lock instead of actually turning the cylinder. Also, if you've got a laser cutter, I now have a pattern on my notes page that will allow you to create these little plates that if I can find what I did of them, will illustrate something pretty cool. Let me see if I have my plates in here. There's the plates. And let me see if I have my neodymium magnets. Now here's a neodymium magnet. Basically, you can cut these things out if you have a laser cutter, and they have a perfect double D hole in it, and they have a little square hole or rectangular hole that hold a certain size of neodymium magnet, specifically 5 by 3 millimeter. And the way that works is, let me switch back over. You can now mount the lock, even in a round hole, put this behind it, have this sticking out. You may have to use 2 of the plates, and you can use this as your touch point. You wrap your wire around that, and that becomes your switch. Since it's a magnet, as soon as it's a conductive magnet, since it's neodymium, as soon as that touches, it makes an awesome switch. Also, that back plate, I basically made a pattern that should fit perfectly in one of these ammo cans. So if you have a laser cutter, that basically will cut out everything that, I did the hard work drilling and not trying to break the plastic glass for you. So I really want a laser cutter, but I don't actually have one, sadly. But that's one way of improving the switching on these. And I've got a bunch of these plates made up. And hopefully Dawson is going to create me some more here in a bit. But that's him actually cutting those plates out with the laser cutter at Blooming Fools. All right, the main board I used, as I mentioned before, is Tinsy. That's not too expensive, like 16 bucks. And I have a bunch laying around from other projects. One of the reasons you see, and one reason that thing is so fragile, is as a prototype, I used all jumpers because I wanted to reuse the Tinsy later on. So, that's one problem with how I designed that one. But the Tinsy is nice for prototyping things. You could also use an Arduino Leonardo knockoff. The code I posted is for the Tinsy, but functionally, you just have to change some pin numbers and it should work no problem with the Leonardo, or even an older Arduino for that matter. A bunch of jumpers I use just for prototyping. I've used power supplies that will take, in theory, like I think 9 volts down to 5 volts, but has anybody ever experienced power supplies that say to a certain voltage, you plug them in, they're actually like twice, or I have a bunch of like 9 and 12 volt power supplies that seem to start becoming 18 volts over time, and I'm not sure what happened there. I've blown up some equipment doing that. Little $8 16 by 2 serial LCD, just because it's easy to wire that for display. A normal LCD uses a lot of wires you have to hook up. This thing just has a little backpack on it that makes it nice and easy. And a bunch of neodymium magnets. Also, if you want, you can get a little RGB LED so you can have a pretty light show as you see this thing's going. I'm going to turn this thing back up. Yeah, some wires are just freaking out and slightly loose because it's screwing up the display. I'm going to try to fix that during lunch. Okay, I thought I already covered types of locks a little bit earlier, so I want to use pin tumbler locks for some of these games because pin tumbler locks is more likely what you're going to encounter on doors. However, most of these can locks you're going to find are wafer locks, like the ones I mentioned before. So I would not have games that had more than just wafer locks in it. There's not much variety in wafer locks, and usually wafer locks are pretty crap. You can open them easy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where to source those kind of parts. But a lot of parts I source as far as electronics is from eBay. And a lot of the cheapest stuff is Chinese. It's really slow to get. It's a lot of knockoff items. Sometimes you get stuff that's suboptimal or broken or not quite what you thought you ordered. So if you order something, especially like displays, Google around for code to make sure that whatever board you're ordering actually has usable source code out there for the development environment that'll work. Like I bought some that there was like no Arduino libraries, though it kind of insinuated that there were. So be careful what you go for, and also it's a time money trade-off because while the Chinese stuff is usually cheaper, and I don't think it all comes from China, but ordering direct from China is usually cheaper, but it takes a long time. Now, as far as pin tumbler options for cam locks for some of these games, this is a bunch of model numbers, which is only good for you as notes later on if they want to recreate these games, that you can find at local hardware stores like Lowe's and carries these. I think the prime lines I found at Home Depot, maybe. National makes one. You can Google these and find online retailers. Now this one is CCL one. I got that one from a company called HL Flake. which a buddy of mine up in Cleveland told me about. And the nice thing then is you can order stuff in bulk really cheap. And this one is a pin tumbler lock. It also has a clip and a nut, and it's really easy to repin. Some of the ones in that one game I had where I took it down to like only 2 pins, I basically used one of their locks, pulled up a strip, took out some of the pins to make it easier. So those ones are easy to repin. I highly recommend them if you want to make little portable games. Other options you have, if you want to include padlocks in your game, is you can essentially make one using a hasp. There's different types of hasps out there. I already showed one of these off. This is a type of padlock hasp, and I've actually used one similar to this in my gym, where you put the padlock in through that hole, and normally it's locked. Then when you take the padlock out, you let that swing down, and it becomes unlocked. That's one type of padlock hasp, so it's not the most common one. Another type of padlock hasp, and this one you'll see a lot more often, is called staple hasp. And let me see if I can show you and get this close enough without unplugging anything. Okay, you see I have a little padlock there. Now I've left it unlocked for the sake of convenience. There's a little switch right behind it you can see. Essentially that is a normally closed switch, and when this is no longer pressing down on it, it reads and it knows the lock is now picked, or open at least. We'll talk a little bit more about the pictorial computer here in a bit. So that's another way you can do a switching mechanism on a padlock. Okay, another source, by the way, something I mentioned, a lot of things are just general notes that I found over time that help people make these games. If you're trying to make a lock-picking game and you want cheap locks, you want like cheap door locks, I was looking around for a place, and spending for a game $12 at least usually on a door lock gets kind of prohibitively expensive for a while. But if you go out to some place like Humanity's restores, they have a bunch of really cheap locks because vendors like take locks out of doors that they're refurbishing or whatever, and they give them to these people to sell, and it helps raise money for the charity, but you get really cheap locks. For instance, now I only got the locks, not the boards and everything, but this one game I got right here that I'm just beginning to work on for prototyping, I actually bought both of these door locks last night at a restore here in Dayton, and I think I paid a grand total of $650 for that, well, plus tax. So that's definitely the place you need to go to check them out. What's that?
I was going to say, there is a restore here.
Yeah, and I've already hit it up for what locks I wanted. I'll have to visit next year also. But there's like 3 in the Louisville area I didn't know about. I'm going to go visit on my way home, I think. But that's a great place for cheap locks. Oh, I want to thank InfoSys. She sent me that picture of the one in someplace in the Cleveland area. It had a ton of them. Tools that you might want to use. Originally, I wanted to do this entire thing cheaply, so this is stuff I already had laying around, like pliers, wrenches, screwdrivers, etc. However, I quickly found that I cannot do a straight line without proper tools. So these are all things you probably want to have. Dremel and rotary tools. Dremel is just so useful for so many things. It's nice to have around. A scroll saw is nice to be able to cut things. However, I found my scroll saw, I never could cut straight edge with it, and rarely did I ever actually have to make one that was curved in the right way that I could do it with that scroll saw. So I eventually ended up spending, I don't know, 120 something on a table saw, so I could actually sit there and cut things nice and straight. Other tools I wish I had, of course, is a 3D printer. Because if I had a 3D printer, I can design an enclosure that's much more perfect than this one. This one's from PodTech. I can make one much more perfect than this one and put whatever locks I want in it. Also, well, laser cutters mentioned before, I really want one of those. There's so many things you like. And also, I'd like to have a fin bot. If anybody ever invents one of those, give me a yell. It looks like Kez from Blade Runner. That'd be awesome. Now, enclosures you can find that work pretty well for these lockpick games. Those, of course, well, that ammo can, which didn't work so well a second ago, that you can get at Harbor Freight. But once it's enclosed, and assuming you actually hardwired everything and didn't use jumpers like I did, it'd actually be a pretty rugged little enclosure. The only problem is you have a lip there, and it's kind of hard to pick around sometimes. Then there's normal rectangular project boxes. If you want to do something that's similar to this, just like a little readout for like time, like this is a little thing that Dawson put together for me for practicing lock picking. It's just a little single block with a single lock in it. No deadbolt or anything for practicing on. You can probably make one of those simple little Radio Shack project boxes. But you want to make something a little cooler with an LCD display and all that that's nicely fitted. You don't have to cut the LCD display hole out. Partech makes a really awesome enclosure, which is that black one I showed right there. On the web page, you'll see the beige one, I believe. There's also this MT65B, which I got, and it's not bad. Unfortunately, it's very small. There's not really a battery compartment. But I found that one online, and I don't remember for what price. Okay, that brings me to the Pick Boy, but I've always showed the Pick Boy because of the failure I had earlier with the normal ammo can. But the way the Pick Boy is wired inside, I decided to put way too many locks inside of it. So it was really hard to get everything in there. So I won't be opening that up again for a while to demonstrate. But essentially, it's all wired. What? What's someone said something? It's all wired in there with potential. Let's see, and it's super glued in there. Hot glued in there, and everything's like taped around. So it's pretty ghetto once you get inside that box. But it works pretty well, and that's the Pick Boy, which is essentially just the ammo can scaled down. A few tips if you're going to be modifying enclosures for lockpicking games. Go slow. You know, what's this saying? Use vices and workstations so you can have things set and stable. If you're trying to Dremel out a hole where you're holding the enclosure in one hand and the Dremel in the other, it's hard to do any kind of straight or perfect curve. Measure 8 times, cut twice, because I'm really sucky at modifying enclosures. I have ruined quite a few enclosures, and I hate ruining an enclosure because usually the enclosure, plastic enclosures cost way more money than they should. I want to say that one right there might have been like 13, 14 bucks. It's just a piece of plastic. But I mean, if you want something that looks nice, unless you can order in massive bulk, you know, what's your options? Try to cut and not melt if you're going to use a Dremel tool. Generally speaking, when you start using a Dremel tool, it's going to get such high rates to go through plastic, it's going to start melting the plastic. So you may want to take that slow. Practice on scrap before you do anything else. Like if you already have plastic laying around, try it out. Generally speaking, aim for a large enclosure you need. When I first got that black Partech and put 6 locks in, I was like, oh yeah, this worked fine. Well, actually, I put everything together and the electronics inside. Started running out of room pretty quick. Also, keep shit from rattling around. I suppose you can put like foam blocks inside, that'd be one way. Once I have everything mostly the way I want it, I end up going in and hot gluing things down. All right, other enclosure ideas. Those junction boxes you can get at hardware stores for electricians. I don't really think they look that great. There's something called shadow box shelves. Like sometimes you'll see these weird things in like Target. They're like these wooden boxes that people are supposed to mount up on the wall and have an extra shelf. But since they're kind of enclosed, I think those would be fairly easy to modify. There's also a plastic gutter pipe, which could be easily modified. And there's something called Cridex, which is essentially this plastic that people make sheaths out of, and also holsters, that you can heat up with a heat gun and then bend it around and form a shape with it. And it locks into that shape once it cools down. Better switching ideas, by the way, than some of the things I discussed earlier. Well, the new thing cut out with a laser cutter, the little washer I showed that has the neodymium magnet, that works pretty well. You can also take a piece of, I think it's a 1/2-inch PVC pipe, heat it up with a heat gun, slide it onto a cam lock. You don't use one that has a long barrel like the one that I use for padlocks. And that will shape it to the right shape. When it cools, you pull it off. Then, what you can do is you can put a switching mechanism on it. Now in this case, I made a little switching mechanism that had another piece of PVC, so when it turns, I can have it touch a touch point and trigger. But another way of doing that is to put that neodymium magnet on with a bunch of hot glue after wrapping a wire around it, and that became my new switch sensor. I think that's more or less something similar to what I did in the little Pick Boy down there. Now, I'm also talking about doing door locks, and my next big thing is I want to make a freestanding version of the pictorial, which I'll show you in a bit. But I want to put door locks in it. And a lot of people take door locks and they don't put the actual deadbolt in it. They just put the cylinder in there. But that's not nearly as fun. I like it when I'm turning a lock to have that ka-chunk of the deadbolt sliding. So, you know, there's something satisfying about, you know, that kind of action. So I want to figure out a way to leave the deadbolt in and still get a switching mechanism. I found that there's this little space behind the deadbolt that you can slide a little wheeled switch and make that work okay once you hot glue it in. So that's doable, and that's going to hopefully be in a game I'm going to try to get finished before DEF CON. Other ideas and works in progress, everything's a work in progress. The Pick Boy, I've already created a new one of it. This was an old prototype that didn't work nearly as well as I'd hoped. Originally, this was an enclosure I got, then I found it was way too small. So I modified it, and I screwed up. So what I did was I took a piece of what looked like wood and added it as an extra layer to cover up all my mistakes and misdrilled holes. and now it looks like an Atari 2600. So I call this one the Lockade. But by the way, these little cheap pieces of wood, or in this case, it's actually fake wood, it's plastic. They actually make wooden blocks you can get at Home Depot. They give away these scraps for floor tiling, but they're awesome for making in fillers for lockpick games. And it's really nice looking wood too, because they put a nice polish on it. Like I think this one's a maple. And it's actually real maple. It was free, and I just have to cut it down to the right size. But it's got a great finish on it. It's nice and thick. And I hope to put that in some games later on if I screw up holes. I also think it was free. I can just keep drilling holes if I mess one up and just put in a new filler piece. But yeah, that's the Pictori. Also a problem of it being kind of small. How much time do I got?
Yeah, it's about 7 minutes.
All right, let me run through this. But I want to do something called a pictorial computer. And originally I was going to do something like the Lockade for this. My original idea for the pictorial computer was I would have an Android-based kiosk. I usually come up and press a button on the screen, and it would give you a tutorial on how to play a video, how to pick a particular lock. When we pick that lock, a sensor would go off and say, oh, you picked this lock. The way I was going to do the sensors was I was going to have a Tinsy in there that acted as a keyboard, and it would send a keystroke to the Android device and trigger whenever that happened. And I actually got a lot of code to work off of that. However, I eventually ended up replacing it with a Raspberry Pi. I'll show in a second. But I mean, it's still doable. One of the things I'm interested in doing is buying a cheap Android device and make a pictorial that way. But I'd have to program a game for it. That would, I had to program some Arduino software for it. I was going to do it with a web browser and a kiosk piece of software, but I found that won't work because I can't do full screen on a kiosk. So I have this little game up here, and I'm kind of cheating because I'm not actually picking it. I just have a way I can switch it. But essentially, I have a Tinsy in here, and what it can do is it can send keystrokes so that when it's tripped, it can queue up a certain video to play. So the idea was originally to do something like this for Android. Unfortunately, so far, I can't do it with a web browser on Android. I'm going to come up with my own Android application for queuing and playing videos.
Make sure you secure the Android application.
Yes. But the nice thing about doing it with an Android device, I've seen El Cheapo Android tablets, and as long as they have keyboard support, those should be, I'm tangling myself up some fields. Those should be pretty awesome because you ever tried to price a small LCD screen for a game? They get kind of expensive fast. And a lot of these Android tablets are actually cheaper than I could buy the display for the Android tablet. And I'd have Wi-Fi built in. All I have to do is hook up a keyboard interface to it, and I can have a lockpick game. However, I didn't go that way because I couldn't find the particular tablet I was going to use, and I didn't want to buy one just for it yet. So I ended up making it with a Raspberry Pi, which is what I'll have up here next. Essentially, that's the wiring inside of it. Yeah, it's painful. Basically, I have little switch mechanisms for all the locks hooked to individual GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. And by the way, the source code for this is all already posted. And the idea is when you walk up to it, you can push a button, it'll tell you how to pick that lock. And when you pick a lock, it congratulates you for picking that lock. The parts of that are fairly easy. I use dry erase marker as the backboard, so you can actually illustrate you turn the lock this way versus you turn the lock that way. Also, that's a rear view screen. Oh, sorry, a backing up screen for your car, so you can monitor as you back up. Let's see. And also use a Harbor Freight little aluminum case and put everything inside of that. And the way it works is when a particular lock gets switched, it knows to play a particular video. So let me move over to this, and that's basically what we have right here. So the pictorial, if you want to know how to pick a certain type of lock, you press a button, and a tutorial starts up on it. I need to find a way to amplify the sound on this, because this one's a little bit low. Also, when you open a lock, as I showed before, it tells you which lock you open and congratulates you. I'm working on a much bigger version of this, which I'll hopefully have done before long. Also, I want to get better videos for this, because there's a few locks in this I can't actually pick. So hopefully I can get DOSman to help contribute with some more videos, and maybe find Deviant someplace where I have the game and record him real quick. This is the one I'm working on. It's going to be freestanding. It's going to have door locks in it. It's going to have buttons for pressing for each one of them. It's going to have like a 10-inch screen or so. I'm going to have like 5 progressives in it. So you have like a 2-pin, a 3-pin, a 4-pin. And I'm trying to find the right screen for it. I blew out the controller at least for the screen I had bought. So that might be $89 out the drain. I'm still waiting for this controller to come in, and in the meantime, I've also ordered something called an Elnon 1102A, and what it is this little VGA screen that I'm going to take an HDMI to VGA converter, and you can mount it, hopefully, and I'll be able to use it as my display for this game. But it's still on order, and hopefully it will come sometime next week. So maybe by the time I do this talk in Cleveland, I'll actually have something. A few other ideas I have for future games. You lock my battleship. I'm thinking of like a wall of stuff. Like I have a wall, you have a wall of locks, and depending on what lock we lock or unlock, it triggers something on the opposite side. Something like a battleship game. I thought about tic-tac-toe, which is a similar idea. Oh, breathalyzer game. I was inspired by Rumble Challenge, but that's competitive. I want a game people can play individually, but not at the same time. So my idea is I want to have a game. I already got Roy brought the servo. Oh great, I can't remember what the term for it is. A valve. It's like a servo valve. My idea is to like put some whiskey in that and have a glass and a breathalyzer. I would breathalyzer too. The idea is there are different difficulties of locks. And before you pick a lock, you got to blow into the breathalyzer, then start picking. And it's going to judge your time, the difficulty of the lock, times your blood alcohol content. And I want to make sure it's web enabled and has a webcam on it to take pictures each time you pick a lock. But that game's going to take me a little while to put together. That's a little bit more innate than I immediately have. Also, I'm thinking about games like Reflex and Simon Says, and I remember one called Rakes and Ladders. Just I think the name is really cool. So I'm trying to come up with new things. If you have any ideas for lockpick games, share them. I'm still working on getting the pictorial, settled out. So eventually, I want to move on to the alcohol game probably next. If you want information on this, I'll be posting this slide hopefully on my Twitter feed sometime today. But I also have a webpage that's already out there that has a bunch of notes and code for the games I've designed so far. Quick invite. Hopefully, all know about DerbyCon. It's coming up in September. Come out if you can. Though the tickets are probably going to be sold out by the beginning of September, I imagine. And finally, I'm out of time anyway, but are there any questions? Yes?
Have you thought about using a POS screen?
Poison. Every single one I found is way more expensive than I want to spend.
Yeah.
If I could find one surplus, yes. The problem is you can buy a 19-inch LCD for way cheaper than you can buy a 12-inch LCD.
Well, what I was thinking about was you're wanting to do like the web page, and instead of actually having to write your own Arduino code, you can have just a simple little PC serving onto that screen.
Well, that's essentially what I got now with the Raspberry Pi. The problem is finding that screen. Those screens are incredibly pricey for what they are because they're kind of a niche item. They're kind of like barcode readers. The electronics aren't complicated in a barcode reader. But so few actually need them, and those who need them really need them, that the price is kind of jacked up. Electronics only get cheap when it's mass produced. Yes?
RVs have these little LCD displays for backup cameras.
Yes?
You can get one with an HDMI.
Yeah, I looked around for one, and I couldn't find one that's small that has an HDMI that's not hugely expensive. At the point at which you can find them with HDMI, they're usually no longer backup cameras. They're like monitor cameras for people who do photography. And then they want to jack up the price hugely. So I haven't been able to find one. If you can source one that's under $100, that's like 10 or 12 inches, let me know. But that Elenon was the closest thing I could find to my specs that I wanted. And it's not high def. It's like 1024 by 600. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about being on the other side of things, about protecting against lockpick picking or detecting.
Well, I actually hold talks on detecting. There's certain scratches that will be put inside of a lock from lock picking, but that's probably hard to see, and that's a whole talk onto itself. There are people who do lockpick forensics, though. As far as protecting it, get some ones that have security pins, and you probably have to ask the locksmith himself to do that for you, or maybe order some security pins online and pin it yourself. That'd be one way to make it more secure. Some brands are also better than others, but usually a more expensive lock is going to be generally harder to pick. Yes, sir.
Have you tried to pick gun?
I've tried to pick gun. I've had no luck with them. I actually have one here with me, but I've had very little luck with pick gun.
Yeah, I've never used one.
I've actually had better luck with bump keys. I have a pick gun if you want to see it later on. It's in one of these boxes, but yeah, I personally haven't had a whole lot of luck with them. Yes.
Have you tried looking at the Raspberry Pi screen? The Raspberry Pi, they have like a, I think Adafruit sells like a Raspberry Pi touch screen.
Every single one is way more expensive than $100. Other than it's like it's really, really small one.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a small one. Like I think I picked one up for like same size
And-
as the screen you have over there.
Yeah, and for a small game, I can't really, it's hard for me to justify spending that much on it, because I want to generally get these games, sell these games made and relatively cheaply. But yeah, I've seen those. Like I said, still the best values I've seen has been that about 2.1 inch screen from Seed Studio and that Elenon.
Yeah, I think your best options just like eBay and some kind of Android tablet. You can find them pretty cheap.
Yeah, I'm gonna look for an Android tablet. I say I find the right one, and that's gonna be nice because it's got Wi-Fi built in, so I can make it send scores to the internet.
Yeah.
Any other questions? In that case, let's eat.
Thank you, Adrian, and you provided the meaning to life.